Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Enoch Pratt Free Library on a beautiful Saturday as we celebrate our annual tradition, Mencken Day, honoring the memory, career, and bequest of H.L. Mencken on what would be his 144th birthday, I believe, well, September 12th, as close as we can get to his 144th birthday. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Evan Dennis. I manage the Special Collections Department here at Enoch Pratt Free Library. So I manage the primary sources, photos, manuscripts, prints, the rare materials, which notably includes the collection that Mencken left us. I'm very excited today to introduce our speaker, Thomas Frank, who, like Mencken, spent his career in journalism at the nexus where American culture meets politics, economics, class, culture, all those things converge. And also like Mencken, has not been one to shy away from his opinion. Mr. Frank's written numerous articles as a columnist for Harper's, The Guardian, The Wall Street Journal, just to name a few. My introduction to his work was his 2004 book, What's the Matter with Kansas, which I have very fond memories of reading on the quiet car in grad school on the way from Baltimore to Washington. Besides that, he also read The Wrecking Crew in 2008, Listen Liberal in 2016, and his most recent book is The People Know, A Brief History of Anti-Populism. He's currently working on a new book about creativity and innovation, which will be published next year. We might get a sneak peek of today, in a sense. Along with his colleague Keith White, and again, like Mencken with the American Mercury, Thomas Frank created and edited The Baffler in 1998, a magazine of American culture and politics, which is widely read and distributed around the world. I emailed back and forth with his agent, Stephen Richmond, quite a bit in the days and weeks leading up to today. And at one point asked him to send along some clips of interviews that I could use as fodder for these introductory remarks. And there were great clips. I loved going through them. But the best quote I got came from the contents of the emails with Stephen himself. So I'd just like to read that real quickly. And he wrote, "Today, criticism and history are no longer forms of art. They've had the art completely removed from them, which means that their composition no longer has style. No wonder no one likes it. Criticism and history have become purely political agenda, indictment, or pure instruction and lecture, intentionally written without style, dry, criticism and history, which are intended both as a science in its thorough reasoning and research, and also as an art in its composition with original style." So, with those words, who better to speak today in the spirit of H.L. Mencken than Thomas Frank?
It is great to be here. What a beautiful library. What a beautiful day. Yeah, I'm going to talk about creativity and innovation. Maybe you guys will. Maybe it'll please you. Maybe it won't. I don't know. I think it will. And I was gonna introduce myself with the phrase with which Mencken, when he met Nathan, where he said, "You guys know this." He said, what did he say? I'm H.L. Mencken from Baltimore, and I'm the biggest damn fool in Christendom, or something like that. I'm Thomas Frank from Kansas City. I'm the biggest damn fool in Christendom. I don't want to hear anybody else here claim the honor. It belongs to me. All right. Anyhow, that's who I am. From Kansas City, by way of Washington. And I know the question that y'all are asking yourself. Why is the Mencken Lecture being given this year by a well-known pinko? You know, as we all know, H.L. Mencken was a libertarian, a man of deeply conservative instincts. Why is it me? Why am I up here? I'm not a libertarian. I'm kind of a libertarian, but I'm certainly not a conservative. Where do I get off talking about the great man? Well, in my younger and more earnest days, some friends and I took it into our heads to start a magazine. And the model that we used for the magazine that we started was Mencken's own Smart Set and the American Mercury. Here's issue number 1. You can spot the resemblance a mile away. And we had no intention of reviving Mencken's political views or his social views. You know, his massive self-contradictions, his contempt for democracy, any of that stuff. But we fully intended to mimic his critical style, his mode of, you know, that joyful mode of mockery that he had, which I always loved, his war on folly and Puritanism and public stupidity of every kind. This was back in the 80s when we started the magazine, and our modern day versions of 100% Americanism and fundamentalism and prohibition and all the rest of it, they were all in full flower, and the world was a shooting gallery for us. It was just nonstop fun. Back in the 1920s, Mencken described his magazine, The American Mercury, by saying, "It rejoices," this is a famous quote, by the way, we used to have it at the Bachelor magazine. I think we printed it on coasters so that, like, when you drank your beer or whatever, you could. The American Mercury, he said, "It rejoices in this great republic as something rich and racy and strives only to depict its life realistically and in good humor." What a show! What leapers through hoops! What clowns! Referring to, of course, our great democracy. And this is the Mencken that we had in mind when we were starting the Bachelor magazine, this savage but very amusing critic of American complacency, of the bad ideas that would sweep this country like flu epidemics, one after another. Now, the particular, and that's, by the way, that's my entire career. It's just like, let's talk about bad ideas. Let's talk about them some more. And the bad idea that I am writing about these days, as Evan mentioned, the bad idea that I want to talk about this afternoon is the notion of innovation and its twin, creativity. And these are words that I think Mencken would have loved to demystify. I've been reading myself to sleep the last couple of weeks with the American language, which is just such a wonderful book. I only have the one volume, I don't have the supplements. But these are words that Mencken would have rejoiced in tracing back to their origins and, you know, unpacking in all the idiotic ways that they are used by the high and the mighty. If you know what I'm talking about, well, you'll know by the end of this, by an hour from now. Anyhow, the way that I want to get into this subject of creativity and innovation is by talking about my friends and I and our efforts to mimic H.L. Mencken back in the 80s and the 90s. And the magazine that we started was, as I mentioned, it was called The Bachelor. And this is issue number 1. Someday I'll tell you why we called it that. And the purpose of the magazine was straight up disruption. We commissioned ourselves to go out and challenge orthodoxy and smash convention and afflict the comfortable. And we intended to fly directly in the face of the glossy corporate journalistic stupidities of the 80s and the 90s. You know what I'm talking about, the status, the fake celebrity, the real celebrity, the fake liberation, the fake rebellion that the culture industry dealt in back in those days, and that it deals in slightly revised form to this very day. And we declared war on all of it. A campaign of creative destruction, you might say. So what I'm here to talk about today is why we undertook such an unlikely campaign in the first place. I mean, think about it. A slightly literary magazine dedicated to blunting stylish fake radicalism. What kind of person launches such a thing? And why did we work so hard to put out such an abrasive magazine? Why did we go to such extreme lengths to blast established institutions and insult celebrities and publish essays that were guaranteed to annoy powerful people? Why did we listen? And if you remember the 80s and 90s, you know what I'm talking about. Why did we listen constantly out of the record player, endlessly turning to such disturbing music, always trying to internalize it and translate its caustic fury into American prose? Why did we do it? Why did we polish our provocations? You know, we would work so hard to get every sentence exactly right and recruit illustrators from all over America and labor late into the night over every page of incendiary text to make sure that every single one was arranged exactly right. Why did we do it? Maybe it was just because we were intensely negative people, you know, like Mencken himself. But really, we did all this because we thought those things were worth doing. For all of our sneering and all of our iconoclasm, all of our Menckeniisms, we were the loyal offspring of a country that seemed to value personal expression above everything else. And I think this is both, in some ways, an anti-American attitude and also an extremely American attitude, which is sort of a way of, again, describing Mencken. You think about the way he loved to mock what he called Americano and the Anglo-Saxon, but at the same time was very proud of being a son of Baltimore and of the very particular neighborhood that he grew up in. And he was engaged in this lifetime project of studying the way Americans spoke, our particular version of English, and lifting up this new generation of American novelists and critics. Anyhow, America, as my friends and I thought we knew this country, America prized originality and inquiry and even robust challenges to its most cherished assumptions. America told us, when we were young, that it honored writers and musicians and critics and anyone else who could help us shatter our complacency and understand our common humanity. America told us that it respected people who went against the current, defied the crowd, who put it all on the line in pursuit of a worthy paragraph. Creative expression, America told us, was the greatest good of human civilization. And we believed it. And so from our crumbling and anti-glamorous corner of the Midwest, my friends and I tried to punch through the complacency. We tried to speak plainly and clearly and powerfully and truthfully about our lives and the lives of the people that we cared about. Now, needless to say, we received the support of no billionaires, no strategic marketing partners, no friendly institutions. We won no awards. We received no fellowships. We got no grants from the great foundations, which in retrospect was the way we expected it to be, and in fact, the way we wanted it. Our authorship was completely unauthorized. Like the indie rock music that we idolized back in those days, we were entirely self-directed. We answered to no one. We were commissioned by nobody. We did exactly what we wanted to do and nothing else. We were free to romp the world, observing and obsessing and criticizing in whatever terms we chose. The terms we chose were these: to assail the mighty and the deluded, to puncture the puffed up and the celebrated, to expose the fraud behind this year's dominant idea. And my friends, there is always fraud behind this year's dominant idea. You can always depend on fraud. I mean, the 1990s, which was sort of our heyday, was like this parade of official falsehood, of lies collectively agreed upon by the mighty. And for us in our crumbling and bypassed neighborhood, the world was like a carnival shooting gallery that would just never end. What a show! What leapers through hoops! What clowns! So we declared war on the empire of falsehood. And in our war with the world, war on the world, we had three main fronts, at least in the early days, three main sort of avenues of attack, three subjects that fascinated us above all others. And they were the music industry, that was number one, churning out this kind of shiny replica angst, while the real vital thing was thriving right down the street from you if you cared to look. The second one was the press, which we assail for its love of celebrity and its guileless transmission of official narratives, its unconcern with anything having to do with work and economic power. And the third target were the reigning sages of the liberal arts, who we attacked for their pointless hyper-professionalization and for turning their backs on a country that really needed them. Now, I'm not going to revisit any of the skirmishes that we got into back in those days, except to point out one thing, and this is important, that all three of those industries or professions that we went after were healthy and powerful. Back in those days, they were robust adversaries, and they were well worth the ink that we expended on them. I mean, this war was worthwhile. I mean, the theory-minded academics that we love to mock and criticize, these guys, back in the 80s and 90s, these were the most prestigious and even the most intimidating figures in our culture in those days. I mean, newspapers and magazines, this is hard to believe, I think, for kids today, but back in those days, newspapers and magazines were actually profitable. They were highly profitable in those days. I mean, working as a journalist, working as a writer was a routine occupation in every city in America. It was a normal job in an industry that functioned as our society's consciousness and as our society's memory. And the music business, I mean, what can you even say? Their product was everywhere. Their dedication to the boring was incredible to behold. Their profits were almighty. And 30 years later, and what is remarkable about these three fields, these three lively occupations that seem to produce everything of significance in the late 20th century, everything that we thought it worthwhile to write about, is all three of them are in ruins today. I mean, start with music. Musicians of the non-superstar variety are, of course, unorganized by definition. In these days, if you follow this, you'll know what I'm talking about. They're in the grip of a handful of very well-organized and strikingly predatory international corporations, what we call the streaming services. Musicians earn incredibly tiny sums for all the services they provide our civilization. 4/10 of a cent every time someone listens to one of their songs on Spotify. Back in 2012, when the music streaming was still something that was shocking and new, a musician friend of mine wrote an article in which he revealed to the world how much money he made from the streaming services. And during a single fiscal quarter, he earned 7 cents from one service for one of his best-known songs. It was played thousands of times. He earned 7 cents for that. From another one, he earned 35 cents. If you add these princely sums together, he said it was still less than he earned from the sale of a single 45 record back in the day. Indeed, it's possible nowadays to make a very popular recording, to have a hit song, and to earn from it less than you'd make doing data entry all year. What's happened to journalism is well, we all know what's happened to journalism, and yet it is weirdly similar. A recent study by Northwestern University tells us that fully a quarter of American newspapers have closed down since the year 2005. Thousands of cities and small towns and even counties now have no newspapers at all. And the newspapers that survive often look like the one in my hometown of Kansas City. First it got sold to one newspaper chain, then it got sold to another one, then it got sold to a hedge fund in a distant state. Today it employs a tiny staff that publishes just a smattering of local news, most of it, these sort of happy human interest stories. And on Saturdays, there's no newspaper at all. This is for a city, a metro area, I should say, of 2 million people. And the consequences of the downfall of journalism are, we all know what they are. They're very easy to describe. At one end of the equation, you have this boom in fraud and self-dealing by the institutions that journalists used to scrutinize. And at the other end, you have the looming extinction of a way of life, H.L. Mencken's way of life, for that matter. Newspapermen are they are finished as a species. There's a small handful left in, New York and Washington, but that's about it. For a person to have any kind of writerly aspirations these days, novels, epic poems, literary essays in the style of H.L. Mencken or Lewis Lapham. If you want to pursue that as a career, you have to either be some kind of critical favorite who wins prizes and foundation grants, or else you have to possess some source of income other than writing, which is to say that you have to be personally wealthy. Either way, the writers that survive come to resemble one another more and more, giving rise to what we all know, what we all see around us today, every day, which is this media monoculture, in which there's this tiny little tribe of Ivy League graduates, and inside this group, and I live in Washington now, and I see these people every day. Every single member of the group interprets events, trends, public figures. All of them interpret these things in exactly the same predictable way. Everybody in the industry comes up with the exact same interpretations all the time. And this is for a country of 300 million people. The troubles in academia are a little more difficult to perceive because the big universities they are making money hand over fist nowadays. College town real estate is in this, it's booming like crazy. University-linked industries like pharma and tech are very prosperous. Tuition prices are off the charts, and kids will gladly sign themselves into a lifetime of debt in order to pay those tuition prices. University administrators, meanwhile, are on their, this state of spectacular expansion. They're always hiring more and more deans and sub-deans and entire departments of administrators nowadays who do nothing but come up with schemes and plans for why every university needs to hire more people like themselves. But in terms of its traditional objectives of teaching and research, the American university is a disaster, folks. According to a 2018 study, what is that, 2018? I should know this, that's 6 years ago. According to a study 6 years ago, 3/4 of college courses are now taught by what they call contingent faculty, which means university employees who can be fired at will, they don't have tenure, and they have no chance of ever getting tenure. That's 3/4 of college courses. That's who teaches them. Many of these teachers, they have PhDs, the people who do the teaching, they have PhDs, of course. You know who they are. They're the kind of people that got really good grades in school, and they believe in their heart of hearts, they believe in the meritocracy. They think that academia is someday going to reward their genius. They're going to get a little gold star. But for now, what they earn for teaching those college students who, remember, sign themselves into a lifetime of debt in order to go to these schools, what they earn for teaching those kids is extremely little, sometimes less than minimum wage. A few years ago, when all of this was new and shocking, there was a flurry of horror stories in the media about this. I wrote some of the stories myself, but You would read about working professors on food stamps. You would read about working professors who lived in their cars. You would read about working professors who died indigent and homeless. The phrase that you always see nowadays when you read stories about the liberal arts in America is extinction event. This is the phrase that they always use. It's, extinction for a way of life that, just 30 years ago, perceived itself as standing at the very pinnacle of humanity's creative endeavors, right? Think of this American professors, in the French department or in the lit department or whatever, standing omnipotently on their mountaintop and directing their thunderbolts of theory at any text they chose. And now it's all in ruins. Anyhow, the list of creative occupations that is going the way of the family farmer, we could talk about this all night. I mean, you can make the list. It's a very, very long list, but you get my point. It's a catastrophe out there for creativity. And I only chose those 3 professions because they were important to me when I was a young man, back in my H.L. Mencken days. These were the occupations and the institutions that defined the imagination of my generation, and now they're collapsing. And nobody has any plan or scheme for rescuing them or rebuilding them or anything like that. So here's the question that I spend my time thinking about these days. What kind of society allows institutions like these to wither and die? The simplest and most direct answer, which is, I think, the right answer, is a society that places no value at all on creative work. But folks, that can't be us. America says it loves creativity with a volcanic passion. Innovation is something we esteem over all things. Creativity and innovation, originality and authenticity, these things, they tell us, are our heritage as a people, our national raison d'etre. Indeed, according to the common sense of the last few decades, we are today living through an explosion of creativity and disruption and change that is so shattering and so profound as to make Renaissance Florence look tepid and boring by comparison. There's TED Talks on how to be a more creative person. There's vitamins you can take to make your brain hum like Einstein's. There's innovation jams where IBM employees brainstorm collectively over a global hookup. You can you go down to Sam's Club and buy these little desktop sculptures of someone thinking outside the box. There are creativity consultants you can hire, creativity foundations that go, like MacArthur, they go out there and they identify the great geniuses for us, creativity agencies that'll go out there and tell the world about your latest innovation. Books on creativity and innovation clutter our thrift stores. Cities spend billions reworking neighborhoods into startup-friendly innovation districts where rule-breaking whimsicality is encouraged by law and the tax code. I'm thinking of Port Covington, Baltimore. From the halls of MIT to the incubators of Silicon Valley, innovation and the creatives who deliver it is supposed to be the story of our time. I mean, the literature on this subject is vast. Mencken could not handle it. He would read a novel a day, right? They churned out much faster than that. He could never keep up with it. It is exceedingly popular. Its authors include management gurus, forever exhorting us to slay the conventional, urban theorists with their celebrations of vibrant togetherness, pop psychologists giving the world step-by-step instructions on how to unleash your inner Miles Davis, and science writers with their fantastic tales of creative success and their dissection of the superlative minds that make it all possible. Just about every month of the year, there is a creativity conference scheduled somewhere in America with, the bright colors and the corporate sponsors and toasts for the great disruptors. I just came back a year ago. I went to South by Southwest, which is the classic example of this. Our states, there's many, many others. Our statesmen lead us in worship at the shrine. Every president since the mid-1970s has made plain their high regard for creativity and innovation. This goes back to Jimmy Carter. And it includes even the supposed outsider, Donald Trump. It's in the Republican platform that he apparently wrote himself, the brand new Republican platform. But the greatest believer of all of our presidents was, of course, Barack Obama, for whom innovation was the North Star of both the movement he assembled and the moment that he embodied. He mentioned innovation or innovators in every single one of his State of the Union speeches, describing it in 2011 as being the very essence of American identity. And the architects of Obama's foreign policy proceeded from the same idea. This is Anne-Marie Slaughter. She wrote this essay in 2009 that was widely regarded as the manifesto for the Obama administration's foreign policy. She said, "A nation's economic fate depends on its being able to maintain and nurture innovation." Washington became this bubbling fountain of innovation talk in the Obama years. In 2009, the White House published what it called the nation's first ever innovation strategy. By the way, it wasn't the first, as we know. They've been publishing innovation strategies since the late 1950s, but part of this is part of the sort of theology of innovation and creativity is that pastness does not exist, right? So there's been like 20 efforts to define a federal strategy for innovation, but here we are in 2009, and they say, this is the very first one. Anyhow, in those same years, the White House launched an Educate to Innovate campaign. Later, they set up something called Mission Innovation, which was a push for green energy. You had the Partnership for Cybersecurity Innovation. You had this, they chose a bunch of deep thinkers they called Presidential Innovation Fellows. The Pentagon opened up Defense Innovation Units and also a Defense Innovation Board, which was headed by Eric Schmidt, the head of Google. In 2016, Obama's defense secretary gave a speech in which he managed to mention the word innovation 67 times in 38 minutes, calling for greater creativity in every area of war making. Where is Mencken, right? What he could do with this stuff, it would have been wonderful. Anyhow, in the speech, he carefully name checks all of the era's great tech CEOs. Ezekiel Emanuel, who you might remember was an advisor to President Obama on healthcare reform, declared in 2014 that life was not really worth living once a person's creativity had receded. A tragedy, he said, that usually took place around age 75. Even the Smithsonian got on board back in those days with the National Museum of American History dubbing 2015 the Year of Innovation. The United Nations began observing World Creativity and Innovation Week in 2006, scheduling it to begin on Leonardo da Vinci's birthday. The government of the European Union declared 2009 to be the European Year of Creativity and Innovation. In 2004, a different supranational bureaucracy known as UNESCO invented the concept of what they call the creative city and organized the places thus designated into a creative cities network. The supranational bureaucracy known as the World Bank, not to be left behind, quickly signed on to the idea, hailing the tasteful and yet awesome power of what it called cultural and creative industries, CCIs. They've got a whole, and they come up with this, and then over the years they churn out all of these books and literature, and they developed a whole pedagogy on this ridiculous subject. The supranational bureaucracy known as the Inter-American Development Bank generated its own version of the creative cities philosophy, as did the supranational bureaucracy known as the OECD. Meanwhile, back in America, the great theorists of arts-driven prosperity were coming together in what they called Creative Cities Summits that started in 2004. Back in those days, this idea of a creative city was sweeping the country, bringing planned spontaneity and publicly subsidized dance parties wherever it caught on, inspiring local Babbitts to boast about the subversive lifestyles that were now thriving in whatever Zenith or Mayberry they were trying to boost. Soon, cities all over America featured creativity zones, creativity centers, creativity networks, creativity labs in the public library, museums of creativity in the crumbling downtown neighborhoods. And the reasoning behind all of this was that creativity, and this always meant the same thing, it meant highly visible public art performances of some kind or another. Creativity would inspire or accelerate or otherwise bring about a thriving local economy. And here's the reasoning. Everyone knows that prosperous places have galleries and arts festivals and lots of people who are cool. People who wear sunglasses. People who look like artists. Therefore, prosperity can be easily jump-started by constructing galleries, by sponsoring arts festivals, by handing out sunglasses, by attracting people who are cool. In precisely the same way that wearing a tracksuit while you watch TV all day quickly brings you to robust athletic health. So the words creativity and innovation have been in this kind of roaring 20s bull market for decades now, as older generations of creativity theorists pass away and new ones explode onto the scene with exciting new schemes for original thinking. But the thing itself, creativity, and also innovation, these things have been in a kind of Great Depression that never ends. I've already described the die-off of the creative occupations that I used to care about. For innovation, the story is basically the same thing. For example, despite all of this celebration of startups and innovation and creativity that you hear, entrepreneurship, and by the way, both presidential candidates, Kamala Harris talks about innovation all the time, and so does Donald Trump. Despite all of this talk, the percentage of firms in this country that are less than 1 year old, which is to say startups, has dropped steadily since the late 1970s. So let me state what I'm trying to say very plainly. The fantastic growth of innovation rhetoric has coincided with the attenuation and even the decline of American innovation. The decades in which our CEOs and our self-help gurus and our elected leaders genuflected at the altar of creativity and innovation are the very same decades in which our country's power of innovation and creativity shriveled. So this is not the places to go into the causes of our obvious cultural stagnation. You're going to have to read the book if you want to learn about that. What I want to focus on, the very last point that I want to make is the divergence between between the reality in this country, the unchanging reality in this country, and our fanatical conviction that we are still living in a time of exceptional transformational innovation. Creativity talk is in tulipomania territory, while creativity itself shrivels and dies. How is a misperception like this possible on such a grand scale? I think it's because the people who preach creativity and innovation, they aren't really concerned with those things. They aren't concerned with innovation. They aren't concerned with the actual fate of creativity workers. What creativity is for them is not about describing reality. It is an ideology. It's an imaginary, it's a structure of faith and belief, a mythical explanation for why the world is the way it is. It is less about daring and defiance than it is about acceptance and acquiescence. It's a philosophy that tries to reconcile democracy with inequality, to dismiss the claims of some people while celebrating the claims of others, the innovators, right? To tell us, in short, why successful people deserve their success and why losers deserve absolutely nothing. Anyhow, thank you very much for inviting me. Now, let's talk some Mencken here. Does anybody have questions or comments, or do they want to more show and tell? I brought some other Mencken stuff. Okay, not really. I have the Chrestomathy in my bag. I was going to read from it, but that seemed pointless. You guys know that. You know it forward and backward. This is the bit of Mencken writing that my friends and I loved the most. Was called Pistols for Two. You guys know this one? It's written under the pseudonym Owen Hatteras, which Mencken would use it from time to time. And he writes a biography of his buddy Nathan, and Nathan writes a biography of Mencken, and they're both in their very characteristic styles, and they are hilarious. But it's the Mencken that I really love, the joyful Mencken, the scoffing Mencken, with an eye for detail it's so wonderful. Anyhow, I love this. Anyhow, and you see it's a photocopy made of the original that they have in New York Public. It's a very rare book, but of course it's all online now, but back in those days someone had to go to the library and photocopy it. Okay, what else? Anybody? Yes.
Any hope for any future people going into academia?
Oh, the question is there any hope for people going into academia?
Who was a college student who's...
I know, I was one of those people. So I got a PhD in history, and it wasn't a mistake. I'm glad I did it, because they teach you, I was at the University of Chicago, and it's the most intense scholarly atmosphere I've ever been in my life. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I wrote my first book. It was my dissertation. And it was about creativity. It was about creativity in advertising, right? I was very cynical and skeptical about it. But as I got older, I turned more and more to this. I saw academia sort of wandering away from what I had imagined it to be. And it's like they take pride these days in ignoring popular literature, ignoring anything that's written for a commercial audience. They only quote one another. They only refer to one another. And what bugged me at the time, this is in the 90s, what bugged me at the time was the way they would build up these professional languages of jargon. And they did this deliberately. The idea is to keep outsiders out. And every academic department has its own strategy for doing this. In economics, for example, it's when they started using equations. So that was done deliberately to restrict entry into this and restrict so only people who can understand this very esoteric version of math can be called economists. And so say a guy like Galbraith or a guy like Keynes, these guys who wrote in plain English, or Veblen, who Mencken, by the way, loved to make fun of. But those guys are not economists because they didn't use equations. Or if they did, they didn't use them very often. So that's it's a way of defining outsiders out. And I hated that at the time, and it's much worse today. It's off the charts worse today. And there's that, and then there's, trying to get a tenure. The reason people go into academia is because what you want, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is a tenured position, right? And that's a great deal if you can get one. You get to say whatever you want. You have absolute freedom of speech, freedom to write whatever you want, and they pay you, and you have good health insurance, and in a lot of places they give you a place to live. It's just it's the best deal in the world. But for my generation, and there were guys that I went to graduate school with who have tenure. Right? Some people still get it, but it's a vanishingly small number. I think of all the guys that got PhDs at the same time as me, and there's very, very few of them went on to become tenured academics. So I always tell people, graduate school itself is, if they'll give you a scholarship, then do it. It's a great experience. It's a wonderful experience. But otherwise, you know, it's not a field that I admire anymore. I'm totally with Mencken on this. Mencken had this very healthy contempt for scholarship, you know? Not for learn. I put it wrong. He loved learning. I mean, the man loved learning. He loved reading. He loved science. He loved literature. But he had huge contempt for the institutions that try to control those things. And I'm totally with him on that. The older I get, the more I think he was right about that. And when I was younger, I was always embarrassed at that aspect of Mencken. But he was completely right. So what advice to a young person? Well, you have to go to college nowadays. But and like I say, graduate school is fun, but you cannot expect to get the pot of gold. It's just not there anymore. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Do you think we need new structures for facilitating creative thought, or can we retrofit the ones that already exist, like colleges and I don't know?
Do we need new structures for creative thought? I wonder about that all the time because you think about the structures that I work in. Print, you know, words on paper, and I'm still like that. Like I won't put stuff on Twitter anymore. It has to be in a reputable. You know, when I write something, I expect to get paid for it, which is I'm a living fossil, you know, and it has to be in a reputable publication. And you know, this sort of thing, and I have found my own opportunities just completely drying up. Like I write for a French newspaper. Seriously, that's who pays me too. I went to the political conventions this year. I went to both of them. I always go. I went 8 years ago as well, and it's always at the behest of this French newspaper. They're the last ones that will, and they put my words in actual print on a piece of paper, and then they send me a check in the mail, right? It's like, it's extremely old-fashioned, but that's the world that I live in, and that is dying so rapidly. And I don't know what the answer is. I love writing essays online, but I had a really good taste of that back in the middle of the last decade. I was writing stuff for Salon.com, and it would be read by millions of people, and I would write stuff for The Guardian, and they had this enormous circulation online. But every time the pay for doing that goes down and down and down and down and down every year. You know, they're constantly bidding this down. It's this war of all against all. Everybody, you know, they can have anybody write this stuff. And now you can have artificial intelligence write a lot of it. And so the pay for it goes down and down and down. So the old structures are clearly failing. And I don't know what the new ones are. It's not foundations. Everybody says, well, we should just set up a foundation. All foundations, all prizes, Mencken was right about this too, by the way. All prizes and all foundations, they have this herd instinct. They all come together around the same people. I have a whole section in the book about this. I call them the book that hasn't been published yet. I call them prize magnets. So you have these foundations and you don't want to hear this shit. The question was, do we need new institutions? Yes, obviously we do. I don't know what they are. And I don't know where they are. I don't know where they're going to come from.
Maybe like looking to the past, like monasteries.
That's good. That's a really good idea. Yeah. So I don't know the answer to that. And when I was at Harper's Magazine, I had all these. I met a lot of excellent writers, like the best writers of mine. And at the Bachelor, we had the best writers of our generation. And where are they today? I mean, I have so much of this just sounds like complaining, and I don't want it to sound like that. Mencken had very little patience for complainers, but this is just fact. I think about some of the guys that were so incredibly talented with the English language, and they got nowhere in life. They're great writers, but their books didn't sell, or they never put a book out, or and now all of their writing opportunities have dried up. There has to be a new way of doing this. But I am so sorry to say I don't know what it is. But now it's funny, we look back at the thriving magazine world of Mencken's day, of the early to mid 20th century, and it's like, it looks like paradise. It looks so, or even in the 90s when you had I wanted to work at Harper's. Harper's was one of our models because Louis Lapham, this guy was just fantastic essayist. We all wanted to be like that, and they were doing great in those days. And there were many others besides them. And it's funny they're still going strong, but it's funny how that world has shriveled so dramatically in the last few years. Yes, I'm with you that we need new institutions, but I'm so sorry to say I don't know what they are.
All right, I have 3 either comments or questions, and you can choose to answer whichever one you want.
All right.
Why did you name the magazine, since you led with that?
Okay.
You led off with Mencken disdaining democracy.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is he disdains stupidity.
Yes.
And I think that, personally, I think saying that he disdains democracy is incorrect.
Okay, well, that's arguable. He did write it.
Again, that's number 2.
Yeah.
And number 3, as far as creativity, do you think that the legal structures of both the patent board killing things as well as copyright laws is one major reason why creativity is not paying anymore? You choose to answer whichever.
That's a really good question because people argue it both ways, But anyhow, the only one of those I can really answer fairly is why we call it the magazine. And the idea at the time, there used to be all of these magazines called like the Idler, the Spectator, the Observer. There's another one that I'm forgetting that was big in England. I forget what. But we were in, like I say, we were in this academic world. And the object in academia was to write baffling prose. Like Derrida would talk about this. And so the idea was to mock that. It was even in the title of the magazine, we were mocking this obscurantism. As to what we should do about copyright, copyright in this country is more protected every year. You know how the Walt Disney Company, how they kept extending the copyright to protect Mickey Mouse, and they did it on and on and on. And it clearly hasn't had the effects that anybody wanted, right? In protecting, in improving creativity. And by the way, there's been official inquiries into what's the matter with American innovation since the 70s. I was able to find this in my research. I keep gesturing over here because Steve helps me with my research. He's sitting in the front row here. But I was able to find a federal inquiry under President Carter into what's the matter with American innovation. This is in the mid to late 70s. They worked on it. It was a huge report, and a big part of it was about that. And what they eventually decided to do was that they figured out that extending the patents, I think they did extend patents, and they came up with all sorts of ways to try to encourage people to take out more patents. They were especially concerned about pharma, and they wanted people in pharma to be able to patent government research, to essentially privatize government research. And then they also wanted huge capital gains tax cuts. And they got that. They got both of those things. They did all that stuff. And none of it worked. The people who are paid to think about innovation are always saying we need to extend copyright, we need to make it possible to privatize public research and all this, and it's completely backfired. But I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know what the right answer is, but nowadays it's like, all of these, there's constant efforts to set up, we do it here in Maryland, by the way. There was a big effort under Governor O'Malley to make this more possible for private individuals to essentially to patent government, federal things have been discovered with federal research money. And they did things like make medicines that were once really cheap, make them really, really, really expensive.
I think you're confusing the FDA under Kennedy and patent law.
I might be, but this is still going on to this day. They're still pushing this. And in all the trade agreements that they signed, which are supposedly free trade agreements, they extend patent laws all over the world. Oh wait, somebody else wants to talk.
Yeah, just a quick question.
I'm getting feedback, by the way, here. Is it? I'll stand over here.
Okay, for most of my life, I've been someone who's believed, I haven't been cynical, and I believe America is a place of truth. And all around us, people don't realize that what we see it here in our country, we hear from our government and our people. I've become more cynical as I've gotten
You
older.
need to read H.L. Mencken, my friend.
I don't want to change it to a conversation about politics, because you mentioned, for example, advertising. It was your first book.
Yeah.
You mentioned some other pharmaceutical, so many different fields. We don't get the truth. Now, even in science and health, cheese is good, eggs are good, they're bad, they're good. Where do you get your information? Name one or two publications or radio or something
You're
that
gonna
you get
laugh
the
at
truth.
me. You're gonna laugh at me, but I still read and believe the New York Times. I used to read the Wall Street Journal every day too, and I used to when I started out in writing about politics, I read 4 newspapers every day. They would clutter my driveway. And we had to have this huge recycling bin at the end of every week, but it was the Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Times. Do you guys know what this is? Because they would have the craziest, wackiest takes on things. And there are things that you would never read about in any other publication. So, I can't say I trust, and I probably read the same things that you do, and I probably follow the same guys on Twitter that you do and stuff like that. And I just don't know anymore. I don't know anymore. I do my own research, but like I say, these days I'm strictly in historian mode. And history, you dig and you find. And you dig far enough, you dig deep enough, and you'll find the document. And you'll find, so much stuff is in the is available to the public nowadays. But that's not. I know that's not a satisfactory answer, but I'm with you on this. That we live in a time when it's just like it is so extremely difficult to figure out what's right and what's propaganda. And the people who shout propaganda the loudest are often dealing it in themselves, is what you find. Surprise, surprise, Baltimore. Everybody's a liar. It was absolutely true. Okay. Are we done? Good. Let's go eat. No, wait, I already ate. Let's go drink beer.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Are these for me?
He also said New York Times. Maybe we should get the New York Times.
Yeah, I would like that one.